It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. The topic is how to determine if precision dairy analytics and technologies are right for your farm. And we'll have Chris Cunningham from Dairy Performance Network present to us. And Chris and his group are working with farms already who know the value of their data. They want to put it to use. They are putting it to use, and they know how they want to put it to use in other ways, and they're innovating with them to do that. So Chris is definitely a subject matter expert, and hope you enjoy what he has to say. Come on up, Chris.
All right. All right, thank you, everybody. So, I guess a little bit about myself. Grew up on a dairy, registered, showed at World Dairy Expo a lot of years. Worked for an AI company, semen company, and then got into a software company. So I've kind of been around in the trenches. That really helps for what we're trying to do with these dairies on bringing these systems together. And I guess one thing is that is all these systems right for every dairy? No. Can they work on every dairy? Yes. But it's all about how you use the systems. And I think a lot of the presenters that have been up here already have stated that you got to use the system the correct way to get the most out of it. And a lot of these systems that are being used today, they're using 10, 20, 30, 40% of these systems. It's almost like using a QuickBooks, right? You only use what you need, and then everything else is just sitting there. So we'll get into it. There we go. All right, so I'm going to do a little survey here for everybody. So we have industry people here. So if you are an industry person, I want you to think of your highest technology farm that's using the most and go with it. So we have 10 different technologies up here that are, some of them are really common, some of them are new. And I just want to say, if you're using all 10, raise your hand. Okay? If you're using 9, 8, 7, 6, okay? So we get to that 7, 6, 5 mark, and we start getting a couple hands raised. So as we go through these are a lot of the technologies that are being talked today, a lot of the companies that are here right now. And at the end of the day, these are things that are going to be, moving rapidly in the future to make these dairies better, to make these dairymen more money. So, I got to use the right way here. There we go. All right, so why do we use these systems? So the reason we use these systems is to reduce labor, is probably one of the biggest ones. Automation. Automation is becoming more and more on these dairies on how we can automate these things. Cow health. How can we reduce our transition? How can we reduce our health incidences? Things like that. Compliancy. Compliancy is a big one because if we're doing everything consistently, we're going to get better results. Data analytics. That is one big thing, that how can we use this data to better make decisions on these dairies? Improved workflows. How can we get these cows unlocked faster? How can we get through pens faster? And how can we just leave the cows be cows? And then employee engagement. How can we make these employees just life's easier? The days when, 10, 20 years ago, there's a lot of hands-on work where now it's kind of hard to find that cow guy. And then how can we get a quick return on investment or high net present value? So some questions to ask about the data. So one thing that's been brought up today quite a few times is who owns the data. At the end of the day, the farmer should own the data, but there are some companies out there, systems out there where it does go back to the companies. How do we manage who has access? Tim brought that up about who has access to the information, who can get it, who can remove it. So that is a big thing there. Where is the data being stored? Is it being stored in the cloud? Is it being stored on a computer on the local level? What's the value of this data? What can we do with it? And then will the data have the ability to feed into genetic evaluations. I mean, that's a big thing with where the Holstein Association's going, the Jersey Association. These different associations want to make their breeds better. So if that data can be going back into those associations, it's going to make the breed better, make a more efficient cow. And then what's the difference between raw data and computational data? So that's something I'm going to lean into in the next couple slides. And then how can I incorporate this data with other data on the farm? So this is something that dairies struggle with, just because how do we bring in that feed software data, herd management data, parlor data, and bring it into one central location and be able to utilize it? And then how can I streamline this data? Is it something that I have to physically go in there and run reports? Is it something that's spitting out to me and giving me results as far as what's happening? Is it telling me what's wrong, or do I have to look for these issues? So when we get into this raw data and computational data, here's a graph of computational data. We get on these softwares, and we start seeing that, okay, you can run a report, you can run a graph, right? Well, what if we could take all of this out of these systems and then put it into something like this, where you can see 30, 40, 50 different reports all within one page. And you can change your times around, you can change what groups you want to look at, you can change lactation groups, right? So computational data is really useful on the farm level for guys that want to sit at the computer for hours upon hours, or they just want to look at one individual thing. But if we want to get a whole snapshot of what's happening on these dairies, that's where the customized data comes into play on how we can bring all this stuff together and have it be more useful for these dairies. So the next couple slides, I'm going to talk about the things to ask when we're looking for these technologies. So with these technologies, there's a lot of things that go into them. We work with a lot of dairies that ask us the question of what works best for us. And the first question that we ask to every dairyman is, what do you want to do? Okay? Because what they want to do or what you want to do with the technology depends on what technology probably going to work best for you. So, does the technology provide adequate support, ongoing services? So that is a big thing with technologies, and why people go with certain companies, certain dealers, is because of the service. Okay, service is everything. If service is 100 miles away or 5,000 miles away, and they can't come out to your dairy or they can't do stuff for you, that technology is pretty useless, because when it goes down, when something breaks, who's going to fix it? Is the data functional? Is it useful? Is it something nice to know, or is it something I need to know? So when you get into that kind of thing, a lot of these farms are overloaded with the amount of information they have, and they have so many different data points, but they really don't know how to bring all that together and actually make it useful for what they're using. So what's the timeline of the process for implementation? So every technology has a different way of how it's going to be implemented on the dairy. When we get into herd management softwares, it's touching every aspect of that dairy. If we're in the feed management software, we're just touching the feed center. Okay? If we're doing the parlor, we're just touching the parlor. So there's certain technologies that are going to incorporate across the whole dairy, and then there's going to be ones that just target certain areas of your dairy. So can you build on the technology? So if I buy technology today, what can I do with it tomorrow? What can I add to that technology? So if I put in an activity system, and then say in 2 years I'm thinking about putting in sort gates, well, that's going to make a big difference on what technology that's going to best fit you. So then, how much time and money for upkeep? So this is a big thing too. With cameras coming online, things like that, and with some of these technologies with the tablets. I mean, you guys can remember back 5-10 years ago that you had these Scions and Nomads and whatnot. I mean, you were paying $5,000-$6,000 for the devices, right? Well, now everything is on a simple phone, right? $100 device, disposable. If it breaks, you throw it in the trash. So how much does it take to actually keep things going with these technologies? Because when they're all nice and shiny and new, they're great, but with time, they depreciate, you got to replace things. And one example of that is a farm that I work with. They had put in a technology about 3 years ago, activity system, and we were starting having issues with conception rates. And I started walking around looking for these cows in heat, and then I started noticing that cows that were in heat were not getting any data. Well, the dairyman never thought about managing the tags and replacing them when they go out. So when it was all nice and new, everything worked perfect. Well, now it's something we have to manage these systems to make sure we can utilize them, ongoing. So what changes need to be made before installation? I mean, this is something working for a software company and getting on dairies across the country and across the world, that you'd walk into dairies and they didn't even, like the guys in the pens, the managers didn't even know you were showing up. So you would get to that farm and they would kind of look at you and say, well, who are you? What are we doing here? So the more you can keep things going and have things lined up before these installations, it definitely makes it a lot easier for the installation and to get these systems going a lot quicker. So who owns the data and where is it stored? That's something I talked about before, but I'm going to tell you guys a pretty funny story. About 5 years ago, I was on a dairy farm talking to a gentleman, and I said, yep, it's cloud-based, and all the information is in the cloud. And he looked at me and he said, so what happens when there's no clouds? And I was like, okay, well, your information's still there. And he goes, well, what happens when it rains? Do my cows fall out of the cloud? So where the industry has been and where it's going, it's changing rapidly. And to store the amount of data that these farms want to store now, cloud-based is something that in the future is going to be, a given, right? So how many employees or teams does this affect on the dairy? When we're looking at activity systems, it's affecting your hospital pens, your fresh cow pens, your breeders. If we get into herd management side, it's affecting your calf side, it's affecting your heifer raising, your breeders, hospital health side, it's affecting, banking, inventory numbers. So there's a lot of things there that, what teams does these products actually affect on these dairies? And then, is this a short-term or is this a long-term investment? Some of them are very short-term, put it in, a year or two goes by, and you're done. Other ones, you're investing a lot of money up front, and you're going to be using these products for 5 to 10 years down the road. So things to consider for implementation, which processes on these dairies will be automated with the new technology. So, when we look back 5 years ago, paper list, okay, go get a paper list, go in, grab it. Well, nowadays it's, scanning cows, it's running cows through sort gates, all things like that. But what can we automate with these technologies? And automation, I think, is something that is really gaining traction right now in the industry. And it's something that a lot of guys see as a positive value just because of employees and trying to find good employees. We're trying to reduce labor. Labor being the second highest cost on these dairies. It's definitely something that these guys are really focusing in on how we can automate these systems. So is the system cloud-based or native? That's a big thing too. Cloud-based systems, if that computer goes down, you still have access to that information. In a native-based system, if that computer goes down, well, guess what? You need to get all the information off that hard drive, and you need to get a whole new computer, and it could take days, it could take weeks to get things back up and going. So then adequate internet speed or operation and support, and Jeffrey touched on this morning with just internet. I've gone into parts of the country where you're pretty remote in the middle of nowhere, and internet speed is something else. One thing for guys to look into as far as the internet side of it, there's a thing out there called Starlink, satellite internet. I got quite a few guys that are using it right now and having really good success with it. And it's definitely something when you get into a more of a remote area, it's definitely an internet service provider that can bring a lot of capabilities to these farms that are in remote areas. So an employee engagement and understanding what's to come. So the biggest thing that slows these systems down and takes longer to implement them is just having your employees engaged in what's happening. And the more that we can engage our employees in what's coming and what they can expect, the easier it is to implement these systems and to get more value out of them right out of the gate. Because the last thing we want to do is implement things and then have it take 6 months to a year before we even start seeing any kind of return just because the employees are not engaged with what we're doing. And then incorporating into current farm processes or creating new farm processes. So when we implement these systems, a lot of things change on the way these dairies work. So one of the things I always heard, I even hear it now, is, well, this is the way we've always done it, so why would I change now, right? And I understand that mentality growing up on a dairy farm. My dad was a dairy farmer type thing, and the things they did, it worked. And the reason they did it is because it worked. Well, these dairies are changing so fast now that we have to be implementing new processes in these dairies on how we're handling cows, how we're working cows. And those things do have a big impact on milk production, on herd health, and on employee retention too. Because, one of the things with sort gates is a guy standing there for 12 hours waiting for cows to sort. It's the most tedious job in the world. Well, to try to get employees to actually stay at your dairy to stand there for 12 hours waiting for cows to sort is pretty monotonous. So if we can set up a process that these guys don't have to be waiting for all these cows, and it could be, okay, well, let's milk these pens right away and these pens afterwards, so that way that guy doesn't have to stand there. He only has to be there for 4 hours rather than 8 hours. And then time needed for implementation and for these technologies. Some of these technologies, in a day, they can have them up and running. Other technologies, it takes a couple days. Other technologies, weeks. Other technologies, months to get these things up and going. And it takes time to get things right with these technologies. And that's one thing people need to be patient with, is and they need to understand that not every technology is just plug and play. So how do we succeed after implementation? So this is one of probably the biggest things. Anybody can go purchase technology, install it, right? But then what about when those reps walk away and now it's just you sitting at that computer trying to figure out, what do I do with this system? So regular maintenance is a big, big, big thing. If we're looking at activity systems, we're looking at tag management. If we're looking at parlors, we're looking at ID rates. If we're looking at herd management, we're looking at everything working, data being inputted correctly. If we're looking at cameras, are they clean? Are they functional? So there's a lot of things with the maintenance of these technologies. You cannot expect just to put this technology in on your dairy and for it just to work. I do not know one technology out there where you can just put it in and magically you don't have to do anything else with it. These dairies are constantly changing, and that is one thing that I see a lot of, is that as these dairies change, in these herd management systems, in these activity systems, in these parlor systems, nobody is actually going in there and changing these systems on what they're changing. The vet and the nutritionist, the consultants come in and say, hey, let's go do this, and then guess what? Nobody actually goes in there and changes things for what they're changing in the processes. So then making the data work for you, data is really important. One of the phrases that you probably hear a lot is, if the data is bad going in, the bad is dad coming out, right? And I could use another word in there, but we'll keep it PG here. But with that, if the data going in is incorrect, the data coming out is incorrect, you're making wrong decisions based on false data. That's something that you'll hear a lot of, is cleaning data, right? Well, why do we have to clean data? Well, the inputting process, people messing up on entry, things like that. Protocol compliance, that is a big thing. When we're looking at these technologies, is how can we monitor these compliances, right? Is it something that we have to look at daily, weekly, right? I mean, we look back 10 years ago, we were the ones giving all the shots on these cows when we were synchronizing them, where now we got 2 or 3 different teams, out there giving these repro shots. Well, how do we know that these guys are actually doing what they're supposed to? Compliancy is one of the biggest issues on these dairies, is understanding that if we do everything to protocol, our response and our things, good things that are going to happen are going to go way up. Repro is going to go up. I mean, just one bad guy out there can drop your reproduction by 10% pretty easily. And then engaging employees. So one of the biggest things that we struggle with on these dairies when we're implementing new technology is getting employee buy-in. So if we put an activity system in and say there is false positives on that list and we haven't managed those, and we send that employee out every day to go look for cows on a certain list to say, hey, these cows are sick, and that employee goes out there for a month, spends 2 to 3 hours a day trying to look for 10, 15 cows. Every cow he comes across, except 1 or 2 on that list, are actually sick, right? Well, after a month of that employee doing that, he is not going to believe in that system anymore, okay? That is the biggest failure on why these systems actually fail on these dairies, is employees not buying into the systems. Feed management systems, where that's where it gets into, okay, well, what were we doing before? What are we doing with it now? And, are we getting more value out of these systems? And then maintaining the culture between the people, cows, and technology. So people, cows, technology is the motto of DPN, and it's something that, it all starts with the people, and then the cows, and then technology. And so if you have the culture with the people, working with the cows, working with the technology, you're going to do pretty well with the softwares and technologies that you're implementing. So I'm going to go into a real-life case study of a dairy that we work with. And so this was a dairy that had 2 old parlors. I believe there were 2 double 40s. They went in and they built a brand new 86 stall rotary. And some of the technologies that these guys implemented, I mean, this is a dairy that went all in, right? I mean, we have dairies right now that are just, dabbling in a couple things here and there and then building off of that. But then we have other dairies that have gone all in on technology, invested the money into it, and seen huge, huge returns on it. So these guys installed an 86 cow rotary replacing 2 parallels. They put in sort gates with breeding lanes, collective sorting pens where they're sorting these cows into individual pens based on health, if they're dry cows, if they're heat cows. They're scaling every cow every shift, so they're getting a weight. Every time that cow gets off the deck, she's getting weighed. They put in milk meters. They're getting fat and protein on an individual cow level every day now. They put in an activity system for heat detection, a new herd management system, and post-dip robots. So looking at what this dairy did with the technologies that they implemented and the return on investment, they reduced 10 employees in the milking parlors. Well, I mean, that's huge. I mean, that's one of the hardest things that these dairies are struggling with right now, is trying to find people to work on these dairies. They gained 10 pounds of milk on 6,000 cows. And that's a lot of money right there, right? I mean, you can put a dollar amount on it, but every region's different. Every processor's different on what they're getting paid. So depends on the region, on what kind of money you're making there. They reduced all lockup times on the milking cows. They don't lock up a single cow. So the cows go back to the pen, they leave them there. They don't have to go back through those pens, they don't have to lock them up. So they reduced that. They automated the whole breeding and the health work. And when I say automated there, is if that cow's in heat, she's automatically getting sorted. She's getting sorted into her own pen. All the heat cows are going into their own pen. All the health cows are going into theirs. So when these managers are coming around, the hospital guys, they just go to their pen, and their cows that they need are right there. They don't have to go through them. They don't have to figure out, why are these cows standing in front of me? And then they raised their preg rate from a 26 to a 35. I mean, that right there is a huge aspect when it comes to just, making more money on these dairies. So one of the bigger things that this dairy did, putting all this technology together, was the calling decisions. So based on the energy-corrected milk that they're getting off the parlor on a daily basis, the daily body weights of these cattle as they're coming across these scales, we're calculating a feed efficiency on an individual cow level basis. And so we're taking that energy-corrected milk number, we're taking that body weight number, we're saying that cow's going to eat between 3.3 and 3.5% of her body weight, and based off of how much milk she's giving, we're getting an income over feed cost number on that cow. This dairy does not even look at cows milking less than 50 pounds. The only thing they look at is that cow is negative on our feed efficiency. And so as we get this technology in there, it's really going to say, what can we get this down to an individual cow level basis, but automate the systems that are doing it? So how can we manage these dairies like our parents managed them on an individual cow level, but then also be able to automate it to where, these guys that are working on these dairies can understand it and just follow the protocol. And then full herd automation on this dairy was one of the other big things here. So I want to get into the future of dairy technology. So we're going to try to automate anything possible that we can. I mean, you got feed companies, feed softwares that are out there trying to automate when bends turn on, bends turn off, mixers turn on, mixers turn off, and all of this stuff is automated. The tractor just pulls up, the bend turns on, shuts off when it gets the proper weight, and the accuracy of that is a lot easier than a guy going up there flipping a switch, looking at his phone, whoa, got to shut that off, right? So it takes away all that. We're going to move more data to the cloud. Cloud-based systems are going to be more and more as we get into this. Artificial intelligence is going to be a big thing moving down. API integrations between systems. Real-time data, even if you're 2,000 miles away. And then we're going to get increased data points. I mean, these dairies are collecting more and more data. And so we're going to have more things that we can go off of. And the integration side of it is really what's going to bring all that together. So I want to thank everybody for coming today. It's been a really good group here and good speakers, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris. We did have one question here, and I think it's a question for a lot of the presenters, and hopefully the panel this afternoon can answer this as well. But these dairies, they install technology. Take, for example, the case study you indicated here. When they were making the business decision to do that, did they have an expected ROI? Do you see them plugging that into a number? And I guess just how many dairies are anticipating, or they have actual data to be able to anticipate the ROI on these technologies?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of things that we can calculate into there. I mean, employees, if we look at, reducing 10 employees, it's really easy to put a number on there. I mean, milk production, that's something that, can be very, vulnerable as far as 10 pounds, 5 pounds, 8 pounds. So it's kind of hard to put a number on that. A lot of the stuff, the preg rates, these are things that they can know, but the problem with putting a number on a lot of this stuff is what level are you really going to take it to? There's certain things that are, we know, yep, this is going to do this, but there's other things that just depend on management, and a lot of people ask me, well, what makes one dairy better than the next dairy? And at the end of the day, it all comes down to management. So if you're managing these systems, you can get a lot more higher expectations. So a lot of these dairies, we put in a realistic number, but with expectations to get higher than that number, right? So we want to beat that number by 3, 5, 10, 15, 20%, so that way we can get more return on investment when we do all these things.
Thanks, Chris.